Good evening, everybody. This is Jonathan Berendt. It's a very interesting thing. Every time I do public speaking, and I've done about 1,500 shows in my life, everything from Oprah to Opie and Anthony, if you know who they are, my hands get cold about 10 minutes before the presentation, and I can assure you I don't have performance anxiety. But what's happening is an interesting phenomenon called the physiology of performance. My blood vessels are constricting because I'm getting ready to perform. And that's one of the things that hopefully we can shed some awareness on this evening. And I know sometimes it's hard, having worked with so many people with blushing and hyperhidrosis and social anxiety. I know it's very hard to have a sense of humor about the subject. But, you know, I should have called the Guinness World Book of Records, because I don't think that there would have been so many people with facial blushing in any one place. Anyway, Jim, remember way back when you were getting married and you called up your buddies from high school and you said, "You're all going to come down to my blushing party"?
Absolutely.
That was an example of quarterbacking a situation, being proactive, which is absolutely an essential dynamic if one is going to resolve social anxiety and hyperhidrosis. Just 15 seconds about my bio, which you can get at socialanxiety.com. The thing that's important to understand here is that since 1977-78, I have worked clinically with about 10,000 people of all ages with social anxiety. And I have seen everything from a total cure to the problem being permanent and everything in between. Now, I think in the next 40 minutes or so, there's a ton of information we want to get across. We have the therapist expert and we have the patient expert, who's a terrific role model because he really has resolved the problem. So hopefully we can stimulate some productive and healthy thinking. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start with Jim. Jim's going to tell his story, and then I'm going to do my best to identify the important therapeutic and clinical issues, and I'm going to let Jim respond to them. Okay, so Jim, you feeling any adrenaline now?
I'm feeling it just a little bit. Some good energy, though. It's,
okay, we had about 200 people who registered for this event. I would imagine that by the time we're through, there'll be about 100 on the line, and they come from all over. So listen, I'm going to let you tell your story now.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone, or whatever time it is where you are. My story is pretty interesting. It started around the age of 15. One of my first blushing experiences was when I went to my girlfriend's house at the time when I was 15. So right when you first start dating, I guess. And when I went over there, walked in her parents' house, I could feel that my face was getting hot, and yeah, I was like, well, what's going on here? I don't know why my face is so hot, and everybody was like, oh, you're blushing, your face is so cute that your face is red, and I was like, oh, well, I think I just got windburned today, just out in the wind, and I was like, what is the deal? I don't know what's going on here, and it caused me to start worrying about my red face, and after I left her house, everything was fine, and then the next time I went back over there, I had another little episode, and I was like, well, maybe it wasn't windburn. Anyway, so, you know, as I go back into the next few times I go to my girlfriend's house at the age of roughly 15, I'm going in there, you know, and I'm having to deal with the parents' faces getting hot, and I didn't know what was happening. And I was never necessarily the shy type, and this was causing a problem with me. I started obsessing about my red face, and it was causing me to, I was looking in the mirror all the time after this experience and trying to figure out, you know, see if I was blushing. And as my life went on, different things started happening. For instance, I started in high school. I started, like, when I had to speak in public, right before I would get up there, I started thinking to myself, well, what if I blush again? Anyway, when I would go through these things and have to get up and talk in front of people, I would start to blush, and I started to hate getting in public, and I started to avoid, keyword, situations like public speaking and having to go to big parties where I had to interact with a lot of people, or any kind of place where a lot of attention was put on me, because I just created a monster with this blushing thing. And it really caused me to obsess over my face and what was going on. I would check myself in mirrors, and there's just so many stories like that. But as the years went on, it just became more and more a problem, and I'd say it peaked around the age of 18 or 19. And finally I had enough. When I was a senior in high school, I was getting online, looking for treatment, looking for ways to help with this anxiety I was experiencing from my blushing face. And, I didn't really get anywhere with it. And finally I went to college, and I was having several of the same experiences there, as far as when I would avoid every public speaking. I want to make that clear. I would avoid any speech that I had to give at all cost, because I just didn't want to be blushing in front of people. And finally, about my sophomore, junior year in college, I realized that this was a major issue and that there was something wrong, and I was too afraid to talk to anybody about it and figure out what the deal is. So I started doing some research again on the computer and came across this website about getting a surgery, about cutting a nerve to fix this blushing problem. Hyperhidrosis, the technical term. And I really got excited about it. I thought, hey, this is going to be the way to do it. I'm going to fix this thing. But it was just something real strange about it, and I knew that there was more to it than just the physical part. I knew that there was a psychological part to it as well, but I just couldn't figure out what the deal was. Well, to make a long story short, I ended up contacting the surgeon, and was at least his office, and ended up having a consultation with him. And as I was in the office, I just knew that this was not for me, and it was too big of a risk, and there had to be another way to recover from this blushing instead of getting a nerve severed. And that's when I discovered psychotherapy and started going that route. And it led me to where I am today. I've been working hard.
And Jim, what I want you to do is I want you to first go back and make sure that the audience understands the discomfort and the pain that you were going through. And if I remember correctly, not only were you involved in this anxiety and obsessing, you were substantially depressed. Was that true?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. It had just brought me down in the dumps. There was times when I just thought that this is how my life was going to be, that there was no hope, and it was a depressing time, to say the least.
And I want you to understand that Jim is an attractive, intelligent young man, comes from a very good family, is a successful business owner, is an athlete, has everything going for him, was even popular in high school. And if I remember the story correctly, only can they do this in the South. What was it? What was the prom story, Jim?
Oh, yeah, it was just this ridiculous thing that we had. where you would vote in high school, like Mr. School, and like they would have a beauty and bow thing where they would vote for the most handsome guys. This sounds ridiculous now talking about it.
Listen, this is an embarrassment challenge exercise.
Well, they would vote for the most handsome guys in the school to escort the girls that were doing like a beauty pageant within the school, and I was chosen for that. And I used to hate having to do that because when I would get up on stage in front of 200, 300, 400 people, it would cause me to blush, and I really wanted to avoid that situation as much as I could. So that it just.
I want the audience to know that as you were growing up, you were a winner. And you had everything going for you. But this underlying problem was a demon. So when you went to the doctor's office, I'm just curious, that was probably about, how many years ago was that?
About 4 or 5 years ago.
What was the fee for that operation?
Oh, man. It was like $10,000 or something.
And what was it that made you decide you were not going to do it?
There was something in me, well, at the time, I didn't know the technical reasons, but there was something deep in me that I knew that there was a better way to treat this issue than simply cutting a nerve in my body. And I just knew that there had to be an alternative way to fix this in a healthier way.
Okay, now, let's jump to where you're at now, and then we're going to go over how you got there and what the clinical issues were. Okay? Where are you at now?
Oh, well, I'm at a place now where there's a lot of stillness in my mind, meaning I'm calmer and I'm a lot more proactive. I'm taking charge of my life. Blushing's a joke to me now. I've accepted it, and I've turned it into my friend instead of my enemy. And any time that I'm going to be in a situation now where there's speaking public or having to get up in front of people at a wedding or be in a wedding or whatever it is where you're exposed to a lot of people, I have fun with it. And I'm back to my old self before I was a blusher.
Okay, now the audience at this point is having a very hard time understanding what you just said with you're having fun with it. Can you elaborate? Because you're blowing people's minds there.
Oh, well, absolutely. I mean, it's just important to accept what's going on inside of you. You need to accept your blushing. For example, if you're getting ready to give a speech and you can feel that anxiety, that adrenaline running in you before you're getting ready to talk, a minute or two before you have to get up there, or even an hour before you have to get up there, you just need to say, hey, come on, I'm ready to get up there and blush. This is going to be fun. The adrenaline is your friend. The blush is your friend. The sweat is your friend. And have fun with it.
I had a woman in my office this morning who was in her 40s, and I told her, can you blush? I think she's listening now. I said, can you blush for me right now? And she couldn't do it, okay, because you can only blush when you're on defense, okay? But this whole thing of, and that's something that the audience has to understand. You're going to blush, you're going to sweat when you're on defense. One of the questions, and the more that this kind of anxiety rules your life, the more that you live your life defensively, which creates a lot of problems, not the least of which is a lack of happiness and passion, and the person begins to repress and recycle a lot of anger internally that causes problems. Okay, now, one of the first things we did was we had to do some intensive work on your internal critical script. Mm-hmm. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I'll do my best. There's so many, not to get it too deep, but there are so many issues that the blush can create, and some of mine there were some religious problems there. I grew up in a very your typical American family that demanded perfectionism, and that was a religious family in a sense. I mean, it wasn't any kind of cult by any means, but it was just your typical religious family. And some of that stuff really created an issue with me as far as like God punishing me with the blush, and I would get nervous around my parents sometimes if I wasn't behaving perfectly or doing things the perfect way, or if I were to do something wrong in front of them, that I would think that this was going to be the blush. I was going to blush in front of them, or that this was some sort of punishment. There was a lot of guilt that came with this. I just didn't know what was going on with me. Why was this happening to me? And it was just a real down time.
Would you say that with the blushing problem specifically, do you feel comfortable enough to say that you've cured that?
Well, I feel comfortable. I don't know if cure is the word, because I'm comfortable enough to say that I'm as close to a cure as you can be. I've totally accepted it now. I mean, I'm proactive now. I'm in control of my blush and in control of my sweat and whatnot, But to say that I'll never blush again is not true.
Well, what do you mean when you say that you're in control?
Well, it just like the example that I gave. If I'm going to be in a situation where I have to be in front of a lot of people in public speaking, whatever it may be, where I have to interact, I tell you, I'm the quarterback. I take control of my blush. If I feel it coming on, then I say, hey, y'all need to, it becomes my friend. I'll say things like, hey, you need to watch me blush, or I make the word blush and the feeling of blush comfortable, in other words.
What percentage less blushing do you feel you're doing now than when you first started, as compared to when you first started therapy?
Oh, man, 99.9999. I mean, or more.
Okay, so let's be clear. You still will blush, but you're 99% the symptom has lessened, and when it happens, it does not bother you.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When it happens, it's a totally different experience. It's a fun, playful experience than oh my God, let's go obsess about it and try to relieve the anxiety experience.
There's a lot of the typical person who's listening to you today, Jim, not only wants the secret of how to get well, they want to know how to do it in about 20 minutes, because people are looking for magic, and it's hard to find people who have a diligent mental health work ethic. And what you did is not only did you learn techniques, but you worked on the underlying issues of obsessiveness and anger and shame and all that kind of stuff, which maybe we can touch on. But one point, there's all kinds of technique. And the most important technique, for those of you who like technique, and this may disappoint the listeners, but if you're going to learn to control something, you have to feel that which you are going to control. So Jim is referencing making friends with the blushing. The reality is that in order to have accomplished that, which is a pretty big feat, he made friends with his adrenaline. So let's be clear on what hyperhidrosis, what this whole thing is. No one knows why it happens to some people, why it occurs for some people at 16 and why at others at age 35. But here's the reality. Everybody has what's called their target organ, which over-responds under stress. People with hyperhidrosis have something called autonomic hypersensitivity, which means that their nervous system is overly reactive. So it's easy to say, okay, this is a biological phenomenon. Of course it is. But the reality is, the operative word here is psychophysiological, which means brain and body, mind and body working together. The typical scenario for most of you out there, and for Jim, was when the symptoms would first occur, the blushing, the discomfort, which is driven by adrenaline, what happens typically is that the person gets confused. and they get frustrated and they get angry, which is the opposite of acceptance of adrenaline. And the anger, which is part of the internal critical script, makes the symptoms worse. Oh my God, here comes the anxiety, here comes the adrenaline, I got to get out of here. People are going to see me blush, they're going to see who I really am. I'm going to embarrass myself, I'm going to humiliate myself. Okay, that's the critical script internally. And it is that which is a psychological, emotional phenomenon which drives the problem. Making friends with the adrenaline means that you have to attach to it. And attaching basically, when a person attaches, they then have to invest and learn the technique of acceptance. Now, this is a paradoxical concept for you, because right now, I bet that most of you are the epitome of non-acceptance of adrenaline. You don't want it to be there. And that's why people end up drinking, which will really screw you up with this, by the way, and taking all kinds of pharmaceuticals, legal and non-legal. And the reason that people take that is they want to repress the adrenaline. They don't want it to be there. Now, some medications will repress the adrenaline. But what happens is it's so easy to become dependent, if not addicted, on this kind of approach. So the real thing is when you accept the adrenaline, that's a major, major part of learning control. And by the way, at socialanxiety.com, in addition to Jim, who's doing a really good job here of describing this, and I don't think there's too many interviews in the world that covers content such as this, there are some other phenomenal ones. And one is Kevin, Hyperhidrosis, Successful Lawyer, Performance Anxiety. And he talks about he is in a business meeting, and he used to have to leave court because of sweating, okay? And he's in this business meeting, and he's sweating, and he stops his internal critical script, and lo and behold, about 30 seconds later, the sweating stops. Okay, that takes some work. Now, at a deeper level, we've got a self-esteem issue going on. Why is it that some people will blush and sweat and they don't really care? And others really do care. Last month, we had a teleseminar on selective mutism, which is a condition where kids don't speak because of anxiety. And one of the people that was talking was a retired baseball pitcher. His name was Kirk Reeder. His daughter has it. He used to pitch for the San Francisco Giants. He won the most games as a left-hander in their history. And I said to him, you ever have a bad game? And he tells me once he's pitching against the St. Louis Cardinals. He's losing 7-0. He's on national TV. He has no outs. Okay. I say, how do you deal with that? And he says, well, what I focus on is what do I have to do to be better next time? Now, if you think of that, that's the perfect winning psychology. That's the perfect attitude that's going to improve a person's performance. So ask yourself, what is the content that's going to get in the way of a person investing in that psychology? One is the excessive toxic content in one's inner critical script. So it's important to understand what it is and how it's learned. And two, it's a pervasive issue of challenged self-esteem. And the people who are at risk with facial hyperhidrosis or other sweating have a self-esteem challenge, and it's important to go there if you're really going to resolve the problem. As a matter of fact, I remember one patient who actually did follow through on the operation that Jim was describing, and I think this was 15 years ago, and he spent at that time it was about $7,000, and it removed about 50% of the physical symptoms, but he was left feeling very imbalanced psychologically and emotionally, and that caused a whole another set of problems. One of the things another very important issue here, which may confuse a lot of people, anybody that I have ever worked with successfully with social and performance anxiety at a deeper level has had to do work on anger. And one of the things that I have seen with people who blush specifically is that there is a very high degree of anger. Not only anger that here comes the adrenaline and I'm blushing now, which makes it worse, but and anger that they have the problem. But at a very deep level, if you're not proactive, if you're not happy in life, if you're not going after what you want and developing passion, you're not going to be a happy camper. You're going to be repressing and recycling anger, and that is the emotion which drives the obsessiveness, and obsessiveness is defined as sustained conscious and unconscious worry. And then that can turn into a compulsion, the compulsion not to sweat, to not want to sweat or blush, and that can lead to avoidance, which is a phobia. Jim, can you comment on this aspect of your recovery, how you dealt with the anger and the deeper issues of embarrassment and shame?
Well, one of probably the most important thing in therapy and in treating this blushing issue is truly understanding accepting who you are, learning and understanding what's going on inside of you, the physical part, and the emotional part, for that matter. And again, going back to just making the blush and adrenaline a positive thing instead of a negative thing. And it's so important to also accept the nature of recovery and the task of recovery. It takes work. There's no such thing as a quick fix. And there's no such thing. There's no timetable. I mean, it might take a year for some people. It might take 2 months for others. It might take years. But it's just very important to understand that you need to accept all of those different things, the task of recovery and the blushing itself.
What were you angry about?
Well, I was angry because I was just the kind of guy that, like I said, I grew up in, I don't say I grew up in a perfect world, but typical American family. I've been very lucky my whole life. I was a popular guy, and all of a sudden I had this blushing issue that, was bringing me down. And I thought that it made me look funny, and, all of a sudden I wasn't this perfect guy, and it just snowballed and turned into a lot of anger. I was just angry that I couldn't resolve this. I felt like I couldn't resolve it. There was nothing I could do, and it just was making life so miserable for me.
When we first started working, and we were working intensively, how long do you think it took for you to get the blushing? Because you've got two things, Jim. You have the blushing, and then you have a substantial underlying obsessive issue. Now, this is a key dynamic, audience. The degree to which people obsess is very different from person to person. With the blushing itself, how long do you think it took for you to get that specifically under control?
I would say it really took like 6 months to a year to really get good at and to be a lot more comfortable with my blushing.
And since then, as we have been doing much less frequent work, can you give the audience an idea of what you have been doing in between sessions, because you have been diligently working independently?
Well, I'm a member of Toastmasters, which is just a very positive organization that creates like a business setting at each meeting, and kind of like board meetings, and you have the opportunity to give speeches, you have the opportunity to interact with these different table topics and talk kind of like you're in a boardroom setting, like I said, and putting yourself in situations where you can grow in a positive direction, and exposing yourself to the things that cause you to blush. Whether it be like when I was 15 at your in-law, well, they weren't my in-laws then, but like at your girlfriend's parents' house, or your wife's or husband's family house, or on a date. Exposing yourself to provoking to anxiety situations where you can become comfortable and desensitize yourself to what makes you blush and get better at those types of situations.
One dramatic story I've got to share with the audience around blushing. A couple of years ago, this kid who was 20 years old in college was in a carjacking, and he was almost killed. He was shot. He put his arms up. It blocked the bullet from going into his chest, but he was hurt, and he was in the hospital, and the state gave him money to come to therapy. When he came to me, he didn't even care about the carjacking and the fact that he almost died. He cared about the shame, embarrassment, and humiliation that was driving his life as caused by the facial hyperhidrosis, which was driven by the social anxiety. So about 15 sessions into therapy, he was in front of his class in college. He had to give a presentation, and this is what he said. And I'm quoting directly. He said, "Guys, in about a minute, my face is going to change color." Guess what happened? He didn't blush. That's an example of what Jim is referring to as being proactive and quarterbacking. And Jim has had, I remember in treatment, Jim told me a lot of stories about that. But that takes confidence, and that takes some real work on self-esteem. Also at the website, there's another interview with Karen, film editor, resolving group anxiety and blushing, I believe it is. And she describes this situation where she was in group therapy here. Jim was not, because he's in Mississippi. I'm here in Long Island. And she was in group, and she felt the blush working its way up the body. In essence, that's adrenaline. And she accepted it, and in her words, let go, and the blush did not get to the point that it reached her face. That's acceptance. That's attaching to the adrenaline. That takes some work on anger, self-esteem, and the accompanying shame and embarrassment. Jim, can you really just, one more minute, and then I'm going to try and experiment here. Can you just knock home the fact of the reality of how free you are now versus where you were when you didn't know what was going on with this problem?
Oh, man, I mean, it's just, sometimes I find it hard to even go back and feel what I used to feel, thank goodness. But, man, there's just no comparison. I'm a totally different person. Like we've used the word proactive several times tonight. I didn't even understand what that word meant when I was suffering from this blushing issue. And now that I've worked and worked and worked, I am at a place where life is wonderful. I can wake up and smell the roses, and it's just, once you begin to work with this problem and exposing yourself to the situations that once you feared and start to become comfortable with them, life becomes easier and things start to go your way. Your career can take off, and you're not living in fear anymore, and you just have such a wonderful feeling of being free, and you're in control of your life. You're in control of your blush is the key, and you're having fun again, man. It's you don't have any depressive thoughts. You're more balanced. I think that getting your emotional health under control trickles down to your physical health, and you become just a better person.
I'm going to try something now. I haven't done this before on teleseminars. I'm going to unblock the audience, and I'm going to see if some people are proactive with a question or two. So let's see if and I had to resolve my own performance anxiety learning this conference call technology, but here goes. Does anybody have a question? Go quickly right now.
I'm Sherry from California. I don't know if I have a question, but I wouldn't even call it blushing. I would just tell people I'm in a 12-step group, and all of a sudden, after 20 years, I start blushing every time I speak. And so I just tell everybody, I guess I was proactive without knowing it. But I wouldn't even say it was blushing. I would just say, oh, I get flushed or agitated or whatever. So, what can I do about that?
What you're describing is it's not what you can do about it. You can figure out if you want to, go in depth and diminish the symptoms. But what you're doing already, the fact that you are standing up for yourself and acknowledging what's going on is under the heading of being proactive. There are a lot of people who are going to be defensive. That's what's going to drive the problem. Okay, so if you're doing pretty well if you're saying, well, this is who I am and this is what I do, and the key is that you don't start avoiding things. That's called a phobia, when a person avoids because of anxiety. Let's jump to another question. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Louis from Hialeah.
Okay.
Approximately how many sessions a month would be beneficial for someone suffering from blushing and so forth?
Well, first of all, everybody has their own learning curve, and the learning curve is dependent on a number of variables: the length of the problem, the severity of the problem, the person's motivation, expressive ability to integrate new concepts, and last but not least, readiness to face fear. But when a person starts therapy, they've got to be ready to do it on a weekly basis. Doing it anything less than that would be non-productive. And the thing that gets people into problems is having unrealistic expectations. For example, with the technique of controlling anxiety and adrenaline, the first step of the technique is realistic expectations, which is, it's not will my adrenaline be there or will my anxiety be there? It's going to be there as a fact. So therefore, because it's there, I'm going to learn how to deal with it. Let's jump to somebody else, though. Any other questions? Come on, be proactive, guys.
This is Chris calling from Austin, Texas. My story is exactly parallel to everything that I've heard today, and it's quite exciting to hear something like this. I was just wondering what I've done a number of things, including like hypnotherapy with no success, and I've been through a lot of different types of counseling sessions. My question would be, what is a typical session like? Is it a 30-minute session? Is it an hour? Is it just questions, hearing background?
No. A typical session, by the way, this is all elaborated. If you go back to socialanxiety.com, there's a lot of detail there. But no, it's a very, and there are self-help programs, by the way, too, and people may want to consider that. It's a good head start on therapy, okay, because what it does is it outlines the program. There is a program. And the program is based on the fact that every human being has in their personality, their mind, which is in the brain is a biological organ, okay, has different mind states or ego states. There are 5 of them. In each one is specific energy. There's no such thing as a bad mind state. The issue is the balance or synergy, and this is graphed out. So the person has to understand this. After we take a history, which is important, the person has to understand step 2, these mind states, and what's needed in restructuring. The therapy includes the following things. Number 1 is the emotional work. That is by far and away the most important. Number 2 is cognition or thinking. Number 3 is at some point the person needs a behavioral game plan, but you certainly don't start there. And number 4 is understanding the physiology of performance. So all of that is integrated into the therapy as well as the self-help programs and, the basic book that I wrote in 1992, Beyond China's How to Conquer Social Anxieties. You can get it at the website or in Barnes & Noble. Somebody else? Another question? Go for it. Come on.
Yeah, how do you work on the obsessiveness? Or how do you continue to work on improving social anxiety without getting too obsessed about it? Like the more I work on things, the more obsessed I become in some ways.
Okay, the thing is, what most people do not understand, one of the things that I work with the most is fear of public speaking, for example, and selective mutism, and as well as this, the blushing phenomenon. what most of the professional community, as well as lay people, do not understand is that it is the obsessing which is the dynamic that drives the problem. Obsessing is a combination of physiological, emotional, and cognitive issues. And it's different from person to person. But here's a quick story. One of my patients who is, a major player in finance, and he makes a 7-figure salary, and he was thinking of quitting his job. He might be listening, I don't know. He was thinking of quitting his job 5 months ago. Can you imagine that? Okay, and he was actually the go-to guy in terms of marketing and public speaking, but no one knew he had this underlying worry. Okay, he had his major yearly speech about 3 weeks ago, and on a scale of 1 to 10, he said it was an 8. It was the best that he ever did. Now, what he did was last year at this time, 2 months before the presentation, all he could do was think about the speech, work on it, prepare it about 100 times, go over and over and over, okay? This time, he went over it about 8 times. The weekend before, he spent with his family. He had a normal routine. That's the opposite of obsessing, which is learning self-acceptance, okay? So it's an interesting way that you pose that problem, but the answer is it's important to understand what I was referring to as these mind states, and to be able to you have to learn how you learned not to trust yourself. Jim, you learned not to trust yourself at some point, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Hey, can I make a point here?
Please.
Look, whoever that last guy was asking about obsessiveness, this is something critical to understand, and something that helped me. The obsessive-compulsive dimension of social anxiety, in my case, it is very, very important to understand.
Give the most effective technique you learned with obsessing, because you have had a severe challenge with obsessing. Give a technique.
Oh man, a technique is letting the obsessiveness be there in your mind. Let your thoughts just kind of feel them. Don't try to act on them. Don't be reactive to your obsessiveness. Just let them flow through your mind. And if it's a unwanted thought or a disturbing thought, you can kind of just let it be your friend. Again, go back to that. Just letting things be within you and in your body and in your mind, instead of fighting against them.
One other interview at the website. Pharmaceutical salesman who had been avoiding he was successful at avoiding groups for 20 years in terms of because of his sweating. And one of the techniques that he employed was, he said when he felt himself sweating, he would say, "Bring it on, bring it on." Guess what? The sweating stopped. Okay, let's try 1 or 2 more. Anybody else with a question quickly?
Yes, this is Christine from New York.
Okay, Christine. Where in New York? Where in New York are you?
Northern New York.
Okay.
It's, like up by Watertown.
Okay, what's your question?
Which is crazy. My problem is I blush, but when I get really nervous, I get red blotchy on my neck.
Well, join the club.
Oh, you too. Okay. So that's also a very embarrassing thing to deal with in the public. So I was just wondering how some people might deal with that also.
Well, it's the same thing. It's the same technique. It's the same therapy. It's the same process that's needed to recovery. The blotchiness, as well as the facial blushing, is driven by adrenaline, fight or flight response, and everybody has it. What happens is when the person learns to accept it, the symptom is going to go away. Sometimes when people are here in my office in New York, I put them on a biofeedback machine, and they can see concretely the connection brain-body. And what happens is they see the physiology going up, up, up as in a stress response, and then when they accept it, they see it curving down. When the critical script goes, oh my God, this is bad, I hate this, I hate myself, I worry, the symptoms go up, versus acceptance, it goes up and then it curves down. Let's try one more. Any other questions?
This is Julie, formerly of New York, in Florida now. I'm just wondering, I understand what you're saying about maybe making an announcement that you might blush, but I have to go to meetings, and I have 4 coming up on Tuesday where I have to present evals, and I consider it an improvement that I haven't had a panic attack, but I just, which I never had until last year, I don't know how to do that and still be taken seriously as a professional.
Okay, well, that's not the technique that you do when you're in a board meeting. Okay, you need to find laboratories in which to experiment. Jim was mentioning Toastmasters, for example. I have at least 20 patients right now who, concurrent to the therapy, go to Toastmasters. And when they go, I tell them your objective at Toastmasters is not to give a good speech. That's secondary. Your objective at Toastmasters is to learn how to deal with your adrenaline. Okay, to learn how to deal with your adrenaline. So as part of treatment, we try to find laboratories, key concept there, where you need to experiment. And it's important for people to develop the hierarchy of anxiety. What situations, a 2, a 4, a 6, a 9, etc. And then to be able to take adrenaline control technique and apply it developmentally and gradually into the challenging situations. But you're reminding me of one other story, which I'm going to tell very quickly. One woman came to me a couple of years ago from Texas. She was CFO of a billion-dollar company, and she had a panic attack in a board of directors meeting. And for 1 year after that, was obsessing. And she had never had a panic attack before. She was in her mid-30s. And then she says to me in the first session, she says, there's no reason for this. And I said, on the contrary, there is a reason for this. And the reason is number one, she was extremely perfectionistic, which is very good, okay, because the perfectionism was one of the variables that helped determine her career success. But her perfectionism reached the point of diminishing returns to the point that her nervous system was wound too tight, and she didn't know how to loosen it up. It's like the violin that is too tight and the string breaks. But just an interesting sidelight here in terms of how people learn their critical scripts. Her father was a hugely successful businessman. He was into hunting. I'm not a hunter, but the story's important. And when he went hunting, he took one bullet. And he said, if I can't get the animal with one bullet, he deserves to live. Okay? That's an example of learning the perfectionist script. But the bottom line is, you've got to learn to make, as Jim said a number of times, you've got to learn to make friends with your adrenaline. So obviously, the place to do that is not when you've got, money on the line and your business reputation or whatever. You're going to have to learn how to be creative, which is one of the mind states that needs to be developed in terms of developing the behavioral laboratory for yourself concurrent to the emotional and cognition work. And one other thing I want to point out, too, here is that while the primary component of recovery is emotional, it's emotional work, there are some really common sense things. And I will tell you, sugar is your enemy and alcohol is your enemy. And the problem is sugar is in everything. But things that mimic adrenaline are not going to be good for you. And there's a whole nutritional component of healing, too. Let's try one more. Anybody else got a question?
Hello. Yes, this is Lillian from New York City.
Okay.
And I have a question for Jim, actually. Jim, usually these sorts of things, I don't think, are linear in progression. Did you hit any roadblocks? And if so, what were they and how did you get through them?
Absolutely. You definitely have some roadblocks because, treating a problem like I had is not a perfect road there. And there are several times when I was trying to get better with my issue, and anger would get in the way. I would, because I'm a perfectionist anyway, and which, is kind of a double whammy with it still. And any time that I would run into a problem like if I were, let's say I was working on a situation that would cause me to blush, like if I were to go give a speech or something, and I'd get in there and anger would take over, then I would come out of there. Then this was, by the way, just to make this clear, this was right when I first started with getting help with this problem. But let's say that I'd get in there and I started to get frustrated that I was getting ready to blush or something like that, and I would go and give the speech and come back out, and there was some anger there, and I would get where I would be down on myself for a few days, but I always had the ability to recover and stay positive and continue to work hard. But yes, to answer your question, there are roadblocks that you can hit, but you have to stay positive and keep working hard.
Yeah, but Jim, let me ask you, that was a very good question. I know Lillian. Let me ask you a trick question, Jim. I remember relatively soon into treatment, you were saying something like, my life is 110% better. And then it kind of changed. It wasn't 110% better. It was a lot better, but the percentages were changing. And can you just, comment on that for a moment?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's that I wanted, just like so many other people in the way that society is today, I wanted a quick fix. And I was not willing to accept the fact that this was an everyday task. I had to work hard each and every day to better myself with my anxiety issues. And anytime that I had a slip or a roadblock, I would get frustrated. And frustration and anger don't really mix well with trying to be positive. And that would just set me up for, I would get down on myself, and it just would, I would have to rebound. So those were kind of things that were happening. I tended to get a little too frustrated.
The graph of success is not a straight line up. It's up, up, down, up, up, down, up, down, up, up, okay? And that's very important, because if a person does not have realistic expectations, their inner child, that's another mind state where emotion is located, will get angry and will sabotage. Listen, Jim, I want to thank you. I want to thank the audience. This was a very good interaction. It's the first time I've done this on a teleseminar. And I hope that this process has stimulated some healthy thinking. And there's a ton of information at socialanxiety.com. And if any people have any, want to speak to me directly, you can do that by calling 800-248-2034. Jim, thank you. I'll talk to you soon. And audience, I hope this has been helpful. Take care.
Sounds
guys.
good.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.